And for more on the situation in Honduras, we're joined by Grahame Russell of the group Rights Action. Thank you so much for being with us. Why are we seeing this new caravan of people seeking a better life?
We're seeing yet one more caravan of people fleeing Honduras for the same reasons that we saw tens of thousands of people fleeing, maybe even hundreds of thousands over the course of 2019, why tens of thousands fled in 2018, and on backwards in recent Honduran history, right through to the US and Canadian-backed military coup in 2009. I think there's sort of three main perspectives to take into consideration. What are the conditions on the ground that are forcing so many people to flee into exile? Secondly, what is the nature of the regime in power, a corrupt, anti-democratic, repressive regime? And thirdly, and very importantly, what's the role of the so-called international community? What is the role of the United States, Canada, the World Bank, and global companies and investors that are happily doing business with the regime of Juan Orlando Hernandez in Honduras, the very regime that's creating the conditions that are forcing people to flee in the first place? There is a very vicious closed circle or closed cycle at play here, and there's no end in sight.
Now, what has been the approach of the government of Guatemala thus far in receiving Honduras heading north, and what sort of policy is the Mexican government going to apply in this situation?
I think the Guatemalan government's going to play it a little bit cagey, and they're going to allow Hondurans legally into the country. In Central America, you don't need a passport to cross from one border to another, cross from one country to another. All you need is a particular national ID card. So they'll allow Hondurans into Guatemala if they have their legal identification papers. I think the Mexican, and the reason Guatemala is going to be quite cagey is that they're trying to balance sort of the incoming president's reputation with the public, which is bad to begin with, and the fact that they are another corrupt, very repressive regime that's supported by the United States as well. I think the response of the Mexican government, it sounds certainly publicly, is going to be even far sterner, far more violent. They've come out with very bold statements saying, heck no, no one's going to cross into Mexico. So that does not, this is not setting up well for people being forced to flee into exile from Honduras. And likely, I don't know this as a fact yet, but likely they will be joined by Guatemalans as well as in previous caravans who are also forced to flee very violent and impoverished conditions in Guatemala.
Now, what are the chances that members of this latest group of migrants actually make it into the U.S., and what sort of risk are they taking along with them?
Chances, the caravan itself, the larger groups of people will get more attention for a short period of time. The fact is that caravan or no caravan, tens of thousands of mainly Guatemalans and Hondurans are fleeing into exile north of Mexico and trying to get into the US year after year. And as the caravans get more attention and therefore more criminalization and violent repression from the Guatemalan authorities, the Honduran authorities, the Mexican authorities, more and more will go back to alternative routes, going in small groups of people, going with trusted people who know the way, or going with paying coyotes, as they say, to take them up. There will be no end to people being forced to flee north from Honduras and Guatemala because of the living conditions in both countries. And then the conditions along the road? The conditions in Mexico are particularly violent. They get, both in Guatemala and throughout Mexican, they get a fair bit of popular support. Communities come out, humble people, normal people, seeing caravans of people come out and provide them with food. But conditions get very violent, particularly in Mexico. It's been, over the past years, it's been documented on a widespread basis, violent repression both by Mexican government authorities, military and police authorities, and by organized crime groups. So none of that bodes well for the people being forced to flee in these most recent caravans.
Now, I think you mentioned this already, but in what way are are mining projects and multinational projects like mining and dam building connected to this northward migration we're seeing?
I'm very clear in my sort of understanding these issues that particularly the United States, but also Canada, are directly helping produce the refugee crisis in Guatemala and Honduras without getting into a discussion about other countries. In the case of Honduras, before you get into what the multinational companies are doing, you have to go back to the military coup in 2009 that was openly supported by Canada and the United States, and that brought into power the utterly corrupt anti-democratic regime that's in power today. Then on top of that, once this profoundly corrupt regime was put in place in 2009, there was a new wave of global investment, particularly in the areas of hydroelectric dams, mining, and then on the North Shore of Honduras, tourism. All of those economic activities, along with the traditional economic activities of the production of bananas, sugarcane, and African palm, all of those economic activities are being implemented through violence and corruption and are producing more forced evictions of people, i.e. they're producing more refugees forced to flee their homes and countries.
Grahame, we thank you so much for your time for Telesur English.
Thank you.